Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. In 2021, New York State legalized recreational marijuana and authorized the Office of Cannabis Management to establish a legal marketplace. The goal was a form of reparations for largely people of color who had been caught by what some people call prohibitionist-type marijuana laws. So far, the city has opened 3 legal dispensaries in Manhattan, and 16 Bronx dispensary operators have been granted licenses, though the borough has yet to see its first dispensary opened up. At the same time, there are an estimated 1,500 illegal cannabis shops throughout the city, including some right in the Manhattan neighborhoods that surround the legal shops. So the question is out there. Will this huge illegal marketplace kill the noble objectives of opening legal cannabis dispensaries? And although an initiative was announced by Mayor Adams, why can't the city get these legal shops closed? To examine these and other questions involved in this complex issue, we've invited the CEO of the advocacy group CannaBronx to join us. Welcome to Kavita Pawria-Sanchez. Nice to have you with us.
Thanks.
And the co-founder of the Latino Cannabis Association, it's Jeff Garcia. Nice to have you with us, Mr. Garcia. Ms. Pawria-Sanchez, the mayor says the legal cannabis market could be worth $1.3 billion. Generating $40 million in yearly tax revenues for New York. Is the cannabis movement at a make or break moment because of 1,500 illegal stores that are opened up?
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of complexities here. The illicit market, I think, has made implementation much, much harder than any of us expected. And it really is jeopardizing the possibility for reparations and social equity that we all hoped would happen as a result of the decriminalization of cannabis, because you can't actually have a gray market exist at the same time as a legal marketplace for that legal market to work, right? And so that's part of the complexity. The other is that the state's rules are very complicated and difficult to navigate. People don't have enough capital to start these businesses, and there's very little technical support available outside of hiring consultants, which most of the folks who were directly impacted by the war on drugs cannot actually access.
Is the main reason that you answered in the affirmative to my question is this market, the legal market, in danger? Is the main reason because of the competition? Is that, and also certainly the notion of, I talked about reparations, if anybody can open a store, that's not giving those licenses to people who, is claimed to deserve it. Mm-hmm. I mean, is that what the issue is?
I think that's a huge part of it, Jeff. I know you have thought a lot about this, putting you on the spot here.
That's okay. That's my job, but we'll accept it from you too. So what do you think about the answer to that question? What's the deal here?
I agree 100% that it can and will have an effect. Obviously, there's 2 different approaches to this, right? You're going to still have probably the folks out in the street that still, have their delivery, have their, black market business. What worries me is the stores that are opening up, the smoke shops, because those are the ones that can be most where people will have an issue in understanding what's a legal store versus an illegal
you're
shop.
worried about the education of the general public to say, well, wait a minute, I got one right down my block. Why would I go to, maybe travel a little bit to go to
And then the
legal?
quality, right? The fact that all the marijuana in the legal dispensaries will be tested. So obviously, whoever the consumer is will be getting marijuana that is legally tested by the state. So that is our biggest worry. And that's why we understand the smoke shops and those illegal shops are the ones that can have the biggest impact.
Is this related to I used the word prohibition in my introduction. Is this related to prohibition so that you made sure that all the alcohol is sold by licensed operators, and that you don't have people cooking it up in their living rooms, which would not be legal, et cetera, et cetera? Is this a similar kind of thing?
Well, of course, but remember in the South, people still do their liquor. Again, that is not the worry here. Nobody's opening up illegal liquor stores or restaurants without liquor licenses. So that's what we have to get to in cannabis, is that if you're going to open up a shop, you got to go through the process.
Here's a list of a couple of things. Number one, as you mentioned, the items are not quality controlled. Many times they're laced with other drugs, and we know how dangerous those could be, especially if you don't know what's in them. Kids think the gummies are candy if kids get a hold of it. They even say, this I wasn't aware of, but my research showed that it undermines the state's medicinal uses for cannabis, because people think, oh, I'll just go to the guy down my block. And the other thing, which is a really big thing, is the safety and security of it. There was a raid on West 181st Street. Cops said they seized about $73,000 worth of untaxed goods. A man was killed in a Harlem pot shop recently. There have been all kinds of different crimes. I went by, and we have a picture of it, and we were talking about it before the show. I went by one store where they said these premises are armed right on the front door. That is not a way to have a peaceful, law-abiding society, I would think.
No, it's not.
Maybe I'm stating the obvious.
I don't even know what the legality is of having people
announce
armed
that they have armed
inside these locations. I don't even know if that's within the MRTA for that to be legal, especially in an unlicensed location. So that's very concerning, right? So and where we're going to feel it the most, and hopefully Kavita would agree, is in the outer boroughs, right? In the Bronx, in Brooklyn.
Well, we don't have any licensed dispensaries.
But when they do, because in Manhattan, there's always going to be tourism. There's always going to be, so those shops will find a way to do well. In the outer boroughs is what it will worry me, right? Because if you have to compete on your same block with 3 or 4 other illegal dispensaries that are not paying the taxes you do, that are not paying the bud tenders the way you do, and are not giving people the right information the way you would be, I think at the end of the day, the consumer loses and the city loses.
Ms. Pawria-Sanchez, let's just talk about the competition. If they're taking in if they have $73,000 worth of untaxed cigarettes, vape products, cannabis flower and edibles and the whole thing, how can the legal folks keep up with that? They can stock their stores, but these guys are pumping it out there, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that I recently heard actually a medical marijuana company say there's actually enough room in the market for everybody. That there
that's
isn't.
Interesting.
Yeah, for many
Do you
shops.
believe that?
I do. I think we really will be the global capital of cannabis, and a huge portion of that is because we're such a tourist capital, right? Globally. Of course, I'm not an economist, but I do that seems to be borne out by the market demand. Mm-hmm. What I think we should be talking about is how do we transition these shops to being legal? How do we educate the shops around the consequences of what they're doing and support them in getting onto a legal path? And it's not that simple.
So you're a social scientist, not a financial scientist. I can appreciate that.
And it's not that easy to become legal. It's actually very, very challenging. And so we really do need to be sure we're supporting people in doing that well. And by we, I do mean the city and state government needs to be providing tens of millions of dollars in technical assistance, business development support. It is incredibly complicated.
Well, but you wouldn't give, I'm assuming you wouldn't give that support to the people who have those shops.
Yeah.
Certainly to start, you would only give that to the people who have the 16 Bronx operators who received licenses.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And that's actually the other point I wanted to make is the other threat we see here is that we want to be sure legacy operators and other folks who were directly impacted by the war on drugs, that they are prioritized, right, by that sort of investment by the state. And we don't want to recriminalize a whole new set of communities, some of whom are immigrants, right, in this way. And so how can government really thoughtfully...
So here's a question, and it is a very basic philosophical question. We'll start with you, and I'll ask you, basically, the Manhattan DA and the mayor said they're going to start going after landlords. And so the philosophical question is a legal criminal path the way to go here, or is there maybe a social scientist's way to go here? I mean, is that what I'm hearing from you?
I think...
Like, are you concerned if they start doing with the landlords and it gets into property owners and it is complex? You mentioned that it was complex.
Yeah. Again, I am not an expert in how enforcement could look, particularly as it relates to landlords. I do think that's something we really do need to look at, right? As landlords, they know what's happening on their property. That is a lever. And for sure, we veer away from criminal enforcement in that way.
Mr. Garcia, you have a background in criminal justice, so you're somewhat familiar with it. The fine now is $250. Most of the operators are saying, well, it's just cost of doing business. Just like a delivery guy says, well, I get a ticket because I double park. That's kind of my cost of doing business.
Or like UPS.
Or UP, or whoever it is. Do you see those answers as as real problems to trying to close these shops? Are you worried about closing them, or do you think the industry can survive without closing them?
Well, I agree with Kavita. We got to find a way, right, to bring them into the fold. But the first thing they need to do is stop. The first thing they need to do is just stop selling illegal cannabis, right? Let this market flourish. And then go and apply and figure out a way to go and get into the legal market like everybody else.
How do you get them to stop? Of course, it's so easy to say.
Well, and again, going to the landlord question, that is one of the tools, right? This has to be a multi-pronged approach. That can be one of the tools that they use. But I think that there needs to be some enforcement. And I don't mean incarceration. I don't mean people getting arrested. I don't mean legacy operators going after legacy operators in the street, which most of these operators in the stores are not legacy operators.
I don't want to hear that, but yes, okay.
Well, because again, it like Kavita said, it is not, and like what the whole focus of the MRTA is not about recriminalizing people. And I believe, just like liquor, if you look at liquor, it took about 15 years for prohibition to kind of go into the legal market and really transition. This has to go through that same process, and this is what we're dealing with right now. Again, we have to make it so that these stores do well, and then people want to focus on getting into a legal industry and not continue in that path.
Let's just take a step back, and we'll ask you each about your organizations. Well, you told me that you started the Latino Cannabis Association 2 years ago. Why? Was that in anticipation of this whole process, or did you see something else? I'm just curious as to why you said let's do this.
Well, a lot of
you're getting the same question in a moment.
The main focus around it was understanding that the Latino Cannabis Association was born out of the Latino Restaurant Bar and Lounge Association. It was members who were business owners already, Latinos, who own businesses in these affected communities, right? Communities that were over-policed. And many of these operators of these restaurants at one point in their lives were people that were affected by the war on drugs, either through family members or they themselves. So we understood that having that background, and if you look at what the CARD program is, and even though none of my folks necessarily fit that criteria, they will fit the criteria where these are folks that have businesses in these communities, already are in a regulated industry, and also have that business experience.
And so
we understand that transition will be a lot easier for them.
And so you felt that Latinos in the Bronx, of course that's our concern, understood this, and this was a way of bringing this concept together.
Correct.
By the way, he mentioned the word CARD. I want to just articulate it. CAURD, the Conditional Adult Use Retail Dispensary License. It's probably going to be a common thing that we're all going to need to know about, so we should at least get the idea. So Ms. Pawria-Sanchez, what about CannaBronx? What is the objective? What do you work on every day? Give us a little background about it, and then the next thing we're going to talk about is how to get these licenses into the hands of the right people.
Sure. So as CannaBronx, our mission is to ensure that the folks who are actually meant to benefit from the MRTA are at the front of the line. To get these not just licenses, not just jobs. There will be a tremendous amount of jobs that come out of here. We've been really focused on licenses, right? But that there's community wealth generation as a result of that law, fair implementation of the law, and that we're educating communities.
Was the organization founded before the state did its legal work, or did you say, oh, now there it is, and we're coming out with it?
Yeah, no, the foundations were built well before,
in anticipation
2021.
of it.
Yes.
Isn't that fascinating?
And that is all credit to an organization that's been in the Bronx for 3 decades, Mothers on the Move, where the executive director, Wanda Salaman, saw an opportunity for the Bronx, was able to see ahead, and wanted to be sure the Bronx wasn't left behind, as is often the case.
Well, among the many issues, many of the people who might get licenses have a hard time finding capital. I mean, they've got to find a space, whether they find the space or it's done in collaboration with the state. What helps? What could help move this along? Because now, as I understand, once you get designated for the license, it takes you 2 or 3 months at least, right? Which is partially why I guess none are open yet in the Bronx.
Yeah, it's actually quite a simple formula. One is fair and accessible rules from the state. So in terms of the application process, the vetting, the eligibility, that has to be accessible to people. And right now, our sense is that it will be very difficult. Number 2, again, low interest, no interest loans, grants. There is really no way for people to get capital at this point if they don't have it to begin with.
If they didn't have it. And having capital is or is not one of the requirements to receive a license.
I wouldn't say.
I noticed the hesitation, and that means that there's a complexity.
What's not a requirement compared to other states is real estate prior to applying. You don't need to have real estate prior to applying for the license. However, you need to have the real estate that you want to be in accessible or have some type of agreements. But it's not like if you don't have the real estate, you can't apply. But capital is something that you need to have basically ready to go when applying, because
for any business.
That's exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And especially cannabis, which is very capital intensive and very
know-how intensive. You've got to have a space.
Exactly.
Right.
You got to deal with community boards and folks that have never been in or opened up a brick and mortar place, especially a regulated one, that you have to go to community boards. You got to know how, what you're going to deal with, what you're up against there, location distances from schools and parks and things like that. So the rules and regulations are not fully fleshed out yet in terms of the overall program. We're still in that comment period, waiting for the state to come back. Once that happens, I think we'll have a better understanding of what that looks like and where these shops can go, where they can't go.
Many not-for-profits, many whom I've talked to in the Bronx, and we have a wonderful network of not-for-profits, of social service agencies, have stepped forward. Maybe you would be most qualified to talk about that. Is that necessary? And I don't want to name anybody out there just off the top of my head, but is it necessary or helpful for somebody to partner with one of those groups who wants to be supportive, who understands the concepts that you've been talking about in terms of, getting it to the right people? Is that a good framework to do this? Because then you can get some administrative support, even if you don't get capital support.
Mm-hmm. Always and absolutely yes, and there is a massive gap in the availability of community services, both from an education standpoint, providing technical assistance. Lehman College has a wonderful business incubation service, and we need much, much more of that for people to be able to succeed. And what we're finding is that, we've been talking to legacy operators who come to us and really don't know how to navigate. And so we've been helping folks connect with
and even understanding the product, which gets confusing. I guess we need to congratulate or thank our friends at the Bronx Community Foundation and the Borough President's Office, who have taken it very seriously, and they had a forum and a dispensary workshop and all that kind of stuff. One of the other things that you and your organization has been involved in is budgetary. Yeah. Boy, getting in on the state budget right now, good luck. What is needed? Do you have a dollar amount? Is there any movement from elected officials on this? And what would then, if there is some allocation, what specifically would it be used for?
So this is part of why we're calling this a make or break moment. We're now in the third budget cycle in which the state has not put one penny directly into the investments that community needs.
So they changed the rules, but they didn't come up with the you-know-what
Right.
to
This, the new Office of Cannabis Management that was established as part of the implementation has been funded and will be funded in this budget cycle, which is great. But that is really just the beginning, right, of what's needed. The state's budget currently is $220 billion or so. What we've put out there as an ask is around $200 million, which, to be very honest, only scratches the surface of what's needed.
It's a lot of money.
It is, and it doesn't even begin to match what applicants and licensees will need at scale.
Go ahead.
And that's money that the state said that $200 million, that's money that they told us, right? Between public and private partnership, they would be able to come up with to at least start implementing these newly recipients of card applications, and they have not, and they got to find a way to help these folks out.
I just know, because I've done so many shows on budgets, what the people who run budgets want to know is, if we invest this money, are we going to get it back? You think, I'm presuming both of you think, that it will help the city reach its $1.3 billion take on this,
100%,
and generating $40 million in tax revenues and all that. You're again the best one to add. What would the social benefit be? I mean, you have talked about legacy people, et cetera, et cetera. How do you see the world if this works? Presumably it will. How do you see it changed for not only these people, but for our communities? I mean, I'm going to ask him next about what do we think about people just walking down the block smoking pot. But let's just talk about the effect of this industry right now.
Sure. And before that, I think it's really important to remember that, one, this budget ask that we're making is not something where we're asking the state to do a favor around. It is the state is legally obligated to ensure that the implementation of the MRTA is funded. Right, on one hand, and on the other, both for the city and the state, any investment they make now is almost a sure thing in terms of their return on investment. It's a down payment on that tax revenue.
Do you get the sense that Carl Hastie and Andrea Stewart Cousins are with you on this, or it's still trying to climb up the ladder to get there?
The verdict is still out. We held a rally in Albany a couple of weeks ago. Not one legislator stood with us. Not one legislator stood
but
with
they all
us.
voted for it.
Right. Right. Well, I will say the exception is Harvey Epstein supported our press release, wasn't able to attend in person.
All right, well, that's fair.
But very different. It's a very challenging moment. The issue is not getting almost any attention, which is
Mr.
tragic.
Garcia, are you concerned about people smoking pot in public? You walk down the block, you smell it coming out of cars, you smell it in the hallways of buildings now. In my neighborhood, there haven't been young people, gathering in front of the buildings, but I'm sure in some neighborhoods it is. Is that a concern? Or do you, what will the city look like if this works?
I wouldn't say it's a concern. I think that people just need to be responsible, right? Especially when around kids, when around parks, and all these areas that they've deemed, that we can't do it or shouldn't do it. So I think that people just need to be responsible smokers, just like we trust people to be responsible drinkers, right? You shouldn't be drinking and driving. You shouldn't be smoking and driving and be under the influence. So I just think that it's education and people just being responsible.
Mm-hmm. What's your bottom line for the program here today? What do you want people to know about where we're at, where we should be at? Certainly with a look, we can't deny the illegal shops are out there. What's your bottom line?
Well, I would like people to go and visit the legal dispensaries, right? Even if you got to travel to the city.
Well, right now, that's what you got.
I would like people not to go and purchase from these stores. I would like people to get educated, right? To reach out to folks like us and many others, like you said, Bronx Foundation, Justice Foundation, many others, and just get educated around cannabis. And I think that is what will change things in terms of how people feel about cannabis as well.
Do you have we certainly want to give Ms. Pawria-Sanchez a chance, but do you have a message for Anthony Miranda, and who's the city sheriff responsible for doing this? Should he continue to be aggressive? Do you see it like that?
Well, I think he is, and he will be. But he's only has a certain amount of resources. I'm hoping that maybe the city finds a way to implement these task forces between NYPD and the sheriffs. Again, I know what that would mean.
We're going to run, but you like the landlord piece? You like
the landlord piece? Again, I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and I think that's one of the approaches.
You got about a minute left, Ms. Pawria-Sanchez. What's your bottom line? What do you want the people of the Bronx to know right now?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the hope of this law. There is such opportunity here for the Bronx, and I think it starts with understanding that cannabis is a plant that our ancestors have used around the world for healing in many different kinds of ways. And there's a lot of myths around that, and that is especially for the Bronx. Drugs, the war on drugs caused a massive amount of trauma, violence, incarceration.
We want to try and unwind some of that. Look, we got to run. Thank you for your passion. Thank you to CannaBronx and to you for all the things you do. Thank you to the Latino Cannabis Association and all the things you do. To me, one of the healthiest things we can do is what we just did. Let's have a dialogue. Let's educate people. And keep it going. We also, of course, will thank our producer, Rebecca Hemmick. Director is Nick Marrero. The cast of thousands who are here working with us in the studio. And you know what happens? Right. We'll see you next week. Good night.